Well, I am so excited today. Dr. Tom Wadsworth is here with me on the Beyond Sunday podcast. How you doing, Tom?
Great, David. Good to be with you.
So, Tom, I can't think of a more controversial topic to talk about than what we're going to talk about today. Your doctoral dissertation, a lot of your research has been about how the New Testament does not use worship language to describe the Christian assembly. And I can imagine even people listening right now are like, "What? What are you talking about? What is this heresy that we're about to discuss?" But I want to start with this, Tom. What led you to study this topic? And then can you unpack a little bit about what you mean?
Yeah, great question. It started in 1977, David. I was in my first year of full-time pulpit ministry, and I was preaching through 1 Corinthians. And on the 14th week, I'd been taking one chapter at a time. The 14th week, I'd come to chapter 14. I'd never preached on 1 Corinthians 14 before. Frankly, I hadn't paid much attention to it before because it deals with speaking in tongues. And in the church culture in which I was paid at the time, they didn't they particularly weren't all that fond of this whole speaking in tongues thing. So I was thinking about even skipping over the chapter, but I thought there must be something here. And so
I
I
was
went.
raised in the assemblies of God, so I know all about speaking in tongues.
You got it. And if you know the 70s, the late 70s, excuse me, this was very controversial. And the speaking in
Yeah.
tongues phenomenon was creeping into lots of different denominations, not just the AG churches, but or Pentecostal churches, but it's going elsewhere, and there was meeting some resistance. But so I started to go through 1 Corinthians 14, tried to take it as I try to do all passages from a clean slate, and let's just see what Paul is saying here. And this chapter is the longest chapter in the Bible that deals specifically with the Christian assembly. I mean, it contains way more information about the Christian assembly than any other passage anywhere in the Bible. It probably contains 10 times as much information about the Christian assembly. And I noticed that this one particular Greek word popped up 7 times. And the Greek word is oikodome, which means edification, building up
Mm.
of one another. And in verse 26, Paul comes to this big conclusion. He says, "What then, brethren? When you come together, let all things be done for oikodome, edification." Whoa. All right, that's interesting. Now, what hit me when I was studying for this sermon was, wait a minute. I thought everything we did in the worship service was for the worship of God. I mean, we had our acts of worship that we went through. We had an order of worship. We had a house of worship. We had worship services. We opened worship with this. Then later on, we closed worship with that. And churches have their worship pastors and their worship team and their worship time. Worship, worship, worship. It's throughout our vocabulary. And then I started to dig deeper into what that word, how that word is used throughout the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, every single time, and digging back into the Hebrew and the Greek. I'm fairly well versed with the languages. And fast forward 50 years, that language that we have is in fact foreign to New Testament Christianity. That doesn't mean it's wrong and you're going to go to hell if you use the word worship. I'm not saying that at all, but it is, in fact, foreign. They would not have talked in such terms. Their gatherings were, in fact, horizontally focused on one another for the purpose of building up one another, oikodome. And it's not just 1 Corinthians 14 that bears this out. This is found in numerous places where Christian assemblies are mentioned. Now, nothing I've said so far implies or means that we don't sing praises to God when we get together. Nothing I've said so far means that they didn't pray to God in their gatherings. They did. But what is a remarkable biblical fact is none of these Greek or Hebrew words for worship are ever used in reference to prayer or singing praises. This is our language. This is our terminology. It is not, in fact, the terminology of first century Christians. So that's where it came from. And then I kept studying this issue since 1977, over and over again, digging up literatures as much as I could, going back into church history. I really studied this thing. And finally, in
Mm.
2016, I decided, well, enough. I'm going to take these conclusions and enter into a PhD program in New Testament and throw these conclusions that I've come to, as wacky and as crazy as they may seem, throw them up against a PhD wall and see what sticks. Well, they stick. Now, I have
Mm.
refined some thoughts over the years, for sure, and then deepened understandings in other ways over the years. But I'm now ready to take the show on the road, so to speak. And after I got my PhD in 2022, I delivered some public lectures on this topic. They were videotaped and posted to YouTube. And those videos that I have on my YouTube channel now, as of last week, David, have been viewed over 1 million times. It's really causing a
Amazing.
stir. Some people are upset. Some people are writing me off as yet another wacko. But
Right.
largely, more than 90% of people are saying, wow, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now everything makes sense. I've had problems with these things for a long time, but finally, you provided the biblical evidence that is clear and hard to refute. And now I get it. So that's where we are. That's where it came from, David.
Yeah. Tom, 1977, worship at that time looked a lot different than it does in 2025. And I want you to reflect on what you've seen. So I was born in 1984. So you were kind of studying this even before I was on this earth. But today, worship is a very big deal. I've been a worship pastor, Tom, my full time job. It's not what I'm currently doing, but that's how I got into ministry. So, worship is a career path, worship is an industry where there are artists and songwriters who make significant revenue within an industry of worship. And as you said, worship is front and center to our gatherings in most churches, I'll say in America, but most likely around the world. Worship in song is the centerpiece. Um, how has was that part of your desire to get this research kind of out into the open because you saw sort of how worship had become something so big?
Yeah, that's true. I've always known since 1977 that these conclusions are revolutionary and also would be deemed as heretical, as mine were back then. But something happened in the late 90s, David, that took this worship perspective, this worship model of a Christian assembly, and put it on steroids and launched it into the stratosphere. It's where it's now all we think about or talk about when it comes to the assembly. And that was the advent of the worship wars. I don't know if you've heard that
Yeah.
phrase before. This is when
Oh, yeah.
contemporary worship was seen as opposing traditional worship, and churches would split. And sometimes the early service would be contemporary and the late service would be traditional, or vice versa. A lot of people left churches at that time to go to a church of their choosing that got the music that they liked. But the worship terminology really took off then to a much greater degree than it was in the 80s and 70s and 60s and 50s. And I can trace this, go going back a long, long ways, actually to AD 33. I've had plenty of time to study this thing. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what happened there. It really got to be a thing in the 90s.
Yeah. What's at stake, Tom? Like, I can hear some people thinking, like, what's the big deal? Why do you hate worship so much? What's at stake if we ignore this research and we just sort of keep doing what we're doing? What are we missing out on when worship and maybe celebrity driven stages in our gatherings kind of continue? What's at stake?
Yeah, you're almost answering your own question there, aren't you, David? This celebrity-driven stuff. Well, but
Throwing that in there.
nice little jab. What's at stake here is, again, to put your mindset in first century and these gatherings. They didn't have worship services. They didn't call it worship. They didn't call it services. They didn't call it worship services. They had gatherings. And the Greek word is ekklesia, church. It's an assembly. It's a gathering. That's what church was. Now, our English word church throws us off bad there too, but they had assemblies where they got together to build up one another. And in these gatherings, one anothering was intensive. There was multiple people participating. We have this idea, well, you get the preacher going up there behind the pulpit and delivering his sermon for 40 minutes, and then we'll have our worship session led by our worship team for 30 minutes. But if you want to think in first century terms, forget about all that. Just get it out of your head.
Wow.
Rather, in order to get yourself in a first century mindset, put yourself in somebody's living room. Because these are house churches. Don't put yourself
Yeah.
in a 1,000-seat auditorium or a 10,000-seat auditorium. Put yourself in a small venue like that, like a home. Don't think in terms of firmly fixed pews all facing east or facing toward the pulpit. Think in terms of couches where people are facing one another. Think in terms of a gathering where there's maybe no more than 20 people there. Think also in terms not of just one person dominating with a long oration that he has prepared during the week. Rather, think in terms of multiple people speaking, people comforting one another, encouraging one another, praying for one another, confessing their sins to one another. All these one another's are very strong in the New Testament. I think there's something like 58 one another in activities, and they're largely referring to assembly activities. So to put our head in a first century mindset, think in terms of a house gathering where everybody gets to talk, and the point of everything of what we're doing there is to build one another up. And probably another feature of this gathering is as you're sitting there in the living room, you can smell a meal being prepared in the kitchen as the
Mm.
odors and the aroma starts wafting in as the gathering there, because they're going to have the Lord's meal. We call it the Lord's Supper. It's the Greek word is deipnon, which means supper or meal. Don't think in terms of this miniaturized thing where we have a little piece of cracker and a little shot glass of juice or something. Forget about that. They're having a meal together. And 1 Corinthians 11 is pretty clear about this. It was an entire meal. And that's what supper means there. It got miniaturized and sacralized fairly quickly. But so put yourself in the mindset of, again, a small venue, small number of people looking at each other, all contributing to the goal of building up one another, enhanced by a meal together in which we remember the death and sacrifice of Jesus for all of us. So I think that I already forgot your question, but maybe that answered it.
But aren't you just describing like what most churches would call like small groups? Like we have our large gathering, but then we have small groups where this happens. Is there something problematic about that?
Yeah, great. You're on target here. Yeah, you asked about what are we missing, and here's what we're missing. We're missing the opportunity for everybody to participate or to engage in the discussion. I think people don't
Yeah.
grow until they're able to start verbalizing what they're learning. And in the first century church, they're talking back. There are disagreements. They are asking questions. They're offering maybe a different point of view, but in the midst of all of that exchange, they're growing, and they know that they need to do so with love and with the goal of building up one another and doing things decently and in order. But they're going to grow through that exchange of one anothering. In our modern gatherings, you sit there, you shut up, and you let the pros do their thing up there on the stage under the spotlights. And that kind
Yep.
of, nobody's going to go to hell for that. But so to get that out of your head. But what are we missing? We're missing the opportunity for people to actually grow and ask questions. And we're also losing out on the wisdom and insight and experience and spirit that's within all these people in the gathering. We're just ignoring all of them, ignoring the knowledge that they have, the perspectives that they have, and assuming that only one person has it all. Huge mistake. Paul said, we're all members of the body. The eye cannot say to the foot, since you're not an eye, you're worthless. Everybody has a role to play in the gathering, and we got to be listening to one another if we really want to learn. And when we allow people to engage and to talk back, then they're going to learn as well. So what we're missing is real
Yeah.
discipleship among people, real
Yep.
growth and development. I think that is the real crime of what's happening in our gatherings today.
So, historically speaking, Tom, when did this shift start to happen? In my mind, and I'm no historian, that's why I'm talking to you. But in my mind, I'm thinking of Charles Spurgeon, right? And sort of this advent of a long sermon leading towards an altar call and a very emotional decision, right? And music was a big part of that whole experience. But what do you look at historically to where what you're describing shifted closer to what we see today?
Uh, you used the word shift, and that's the word that I used as well. Well, what I did was in my dissertation and in other papers I've written on this, I not only studied all the words for worship in the Bible, which was helpful, I also studied all the times when a Christian assembly is being described in the Bible. And then I also, since I came away from that realizing, well, they didn't call their gatherings worship. So when did it start? When in Christian history did they start calling their gatherings worship? And there I started to do a deep dive into second century Christian literature. So this volume called The Apostolic Fathers, and there's plenty others besides that. Third century and fourth century Christian literature. And then I began to see the breadcrumbs starting to be traced, where I could see how this was developing. And in video number 6 of my 7 video series, David, people can see where I've traced it there. I've also published a paper on this. It's on my website that goes into detail. It's called The Shift. And here's the
Mhm.
way it works. See if I can do this quickly. Starting early second century, Christians started to view their Lord's Supper as our sacrifice that we are giving to God. Now, that may sound strange to the Protestant mindset, and it does, and it is. It is also strange to New Testament teaching. But one thing that once that concept got going, and it was not strange to first century culture because the Jews went to the temple for the purpose of proskuneo worship and latreia worship. So, they offered sacrifices there. So going to a holy place to offer sacrifices was something that the Jews did, and it's something that the pagans did in their pagan temples as well. And so now the Christians were starting to adopt that same language that was very, very popular in that culture at the time of offering a sacrifice. And the sacrifice is the Lord's Supper that we partake of. The second thing that happens after that was the table upon which that Lord's Supper sat got to be viewed as an altar. And, there's no justification for an altar in the New Testament. There's no justification for Christians offering sacrifices because Jesus is the sacrifice, right? And there's no justification for the altars
Yep.
either. But altars were commonly used in pagan temple. And of course, there was an altar in the Jewish temple as well. So that gets going. Then the third step in this process starts to get planted or firmly embedded in the 3rd century, where the dude who presides over that table upon which is sitting the sacrifice now gets to be viewed. He's not just a minister. He's not just a co-worker in the kingdom. He's a priest. Priests.
Wow.
And the term gets widely used. Look at Cyprian of Carthage. He uses it extensively in the middle of the 3rd century. And so the priest, this is pagan language. This is also Jewish language to refer to the dude who offers the sacrifice on the altar. All right. We're starting to resurrect Old Testament thinking and also pagan thinking at this point. Then the final step in this process takes place in the 4th century when Christians, instead of meeting in homes, start to build special buildings, holy structures. And Constantine helps get this going, frankly. I'm not trying to blame him, but he funded a lot of this. He wanted Christianity to be prominent. And so for it to be prominent, he got to build these magnificent cathedrals. We know the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem was started by Constantine. The St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, that was started to be built by Constantine in the 4th century. The Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, Constantinople, was built by Constantine. Been renovated over the years, but all these have. But he got to go on with this thing. So now you had Christians offering a sacrifice on an altar, supervised by a priest, all being done in a temple. And they use temple language to refer to these buildings. Holy temple. Christians no longer just met in a home over Bob's house. No, they're meeting in a holy, sacred place where all these things take place. And when you have those things, sacrifice, altar, priest, and temple all put together, you've got latreia worship, as it would have been understood in the 1st and the 4th centuries at that time. Then worship language gets embedded and takes off. And here today, we're the inheritance of that entire process. Now, Protestants revised some of this stuff in the 1500s with Martin Luther and John Calvin and Ulrich Zwingli, but they don't really touch this whole sacrifice, altar, priest, and temple idea. They still have an idea of holy places. They still have an idea of a holy guy who's presiding over all this, and they have altars as well. They started to reject, though, the idea that the Lord's Supper is a sacrifice. They knew that that was wrong, but that's really the beginning point. And from that, everything else gets developed, and that's where we are to this day.
Yeah. Fascinating. So did Constantine and all those, years that you described, did they feel like they were being obedient to the scriptures? Or was there some ulterior motive there of control or power that they were trying to wield over people?
Ooh, good question. Really good. I think what I gathered from reading extensively into all these documents, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, certainly there's an element there where there's a power play going on, because early
Yeah.
2nd century, you get a bishop starts to become a thing where there's just one guy over a whole bunch of churches, or if not over one church, where you see a multiplicity of elders over a given gathering in the 1st century. Power is getting concentrated now more to the top, to one guy, one dude at the top of the heap. And
Right.
so he's got the control. But what else is happening is when they start to adopt this sacrifice terminology, then everything becomes holy. And they can even go back to Old Testament ideas. Oh, the sacrifice, and that must be offered in this way. Oh my goodness, we're having an altar. This is a holy thing. And, all this stuff is not biblical for Christianity. We're all priests now, right? Uh, the
Priesthood
temple
of
is
all
our,
believers.
yes. And we're all the temple now because God now dwells in us. He doesn't dwell in a
Right.
building anymore in Jerusalem. We're the holy place. So things have dramatically changed. So it's those two things I think that really sparked this something of a power play by the priests. And yeah, they definitely could hold on to power as long as people felt like they were in control and they were the power broker. And even you had to go to them in order to get forgiven of your sins. And they alone could handle the sacrament. Oh my. So this is,
Yep.
it's all gone down a certain path where those guys get power and control. Plus, everybody else is backing off because, oh, this is holy stuff. And we don't want to be questioning what's holy, regardless of whether it's scriptural or not. That's another issue entirely. But very few people challenge those things until Martin Luther and John Calvin
Yep.
and Ulrich Zwingli started to attack the idea that the Lord's Supper is a sacrifice. But they didn't follow through on a lot of that, of the problems with that system, and we still have that within us today.
Yeah. Tom, as you're talking, um, it's easy to think of maybe some ill intent that people had. Priests had some power hungry priests that wanted to dominate and control large groups of people, right? But there's also the side that even with what we have in churches today, that this is just the system that people are born into. That there's a, you have a pastor who preaches and leads a congregation, and your congregation receives ministry from you. I was raised in the charismatic world, and it was very much the anointed man of God. Don't question the anointed man of God, and sit under his ministry and receive from his ministry. And I think some of us are just unaware of some of these cultural developments that have happened throughout history. We're good people are just shaped by them, and it's all that we know. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is where do we go from here? How do we challenge this? It's not like church is going to change drastically in America. But if there's somebody listening, a pastor who's, hey, I hear what you're saying. What can we do to shift our ethos a little bit or shift our culture a little bit? What would you say?
Excellent. In my final video number 7 of my 7 video series, it's entitled, What Do We Do Now? Because that's where we are. What do we
Yeah.
do now? Ironically, when I was in my doctoral studies, I was for 6 years, and I'm taking classes with other doctoral students, and I would have opportunity to present different papers in different classes, and I would always be focusing on this topic, which was also the topic of my dissertation. But there were 3 different classes I was in, or I'd be presenting a different angle on this whole worship edification stuff. And one of the first questions that the other students asked me after I was done was, "What do we do now?" Or one question came was, "What does this mean?" And
Close all our churches?
yeah, well, here's where, so video number 7 talks about some things that we can do, that anybody can do. I think the thing that we're missing, which you pinpointed earlier on, was one anothering and growth and discipleship. And you recognize that a lot of churches already realize to this day that small groups is where it's at. If you really want people to grow, if you really want people to develop relationships in the body of Christ where they are knit together in love like they're supposed to be, you've got to drill things down into a small group. Now, you go ahead and have your gathering of 10,000 people with a $1 million video program of the lights, camera, and action going on. Okay, yeah, okay, fine. But what it has to drill down to a small venue. And I say small is better. Uh, Instead of big churches, big venues, push for small venue, maybe in addition to the big ones that we've got. Things have to get into a small situation where people can talk, people can ask questions, people can disagree. Don't be afraid of disagreement. This was part and parcel of New Testament Christianity. And we then
Amen.
learn how to deal with disagreements. That in and of itself is a maturity promoting activity. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it and still love one another and learn how to disagree agreeably. And then we all come out of that whole process, I think, much wiser, more spiritual, and much more mature in Christ. And we start to develop our skills in compassion, in love, in being caring for one another, being patient with one another, all those spiritual gifts that were supposed to be applied to an assembly in the first place have become lost to us because we don't have the opportunity to exercise these things. And the place to exercise them was in the assemblies in the first century. So that's one thing I would do. I would push for small gatherings in addition to what you're doing. If you got to do what you're doing, push for small gatherings where people can relate to one another.
So you don't have a problem with the American megachurch, provided it's doing a good job of leading people into smaller gatherings.
Yeah, I think that's right. In some ways, I have felt good about the megachurch environment because they really uh, focused in on quality content. They knew that content is key, and the way they had designed posters around the building, PowerPoint slides, everything targeted toward the message of the day. This is really good stuff that is edifying. They also, one thing that was good about the megachurch, it started to get more and more people involved in the singing aspect of the gathering, getting more and more people
Yeah.
up on stage. I think that, in a way, is good in that you have more people participating and feeling a burden of trying to edify other people with what you're doing. But it's only a select few. And there are problems with this celebrity culture that goes along with that. And you have people who are wanting more stage time, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
what are we trying to do? If people are starting to want stage time, I think we've created a monster, and that people are thinking that if I get involved in ministry, I can be the guy under the spotlight. I can be that
Yeah.
guy holding this silver microphone. Oh, oh man, that shouldn't have been a part. That is a part of the whole thing. That's a problem. There are problems with the megachurch approach, but there are some good things that go along with it as well. Yeah.
So, Tom, is preaching not a New Testament church concept?
Great question. Uh, Video number 4 in my series, David. I don't know if you're teeing these up for me so nicely. Thank you. But video number
I and
4.
I'll I honestly I haven't even watched 2. I've been slowly diving into your videos, but there's more that I haven't seen than I have seen. So,
Video number 4 is entitled "Why They Didn't Preach Sermons in the Early Church," and here's why. And of
you're
course,
stepping
people.
on some toes
I
now,
know,
Tom.
oh
Stepping on
baby,
some
did I
toes
just
now.
get people ticked off? There are people now standing up and yelling at me right now. But now hear me out, and actually hear out your New Testament. Let's go back to the Bible. How about that? Anybody against that? All right. There is, let me cite a study. Craig Evans, who is well known as a top flight New Testament scholar, has produced 70 books. Really sharp dude. Back in 1981, he published an article on preaching in the New Testament, where he noted that preaching was essentially, in the New Testament, the Greek words kerusso and euangelizomai. These words were used to refer to the kind of speaking an evangelist did to outsiders in a non-Christian gathering, like when Paul would go to a synagogue, which was filled with a bunch of
Mm,
Jews. This is not a Christian gathering, this is a Jewish gathering. But he's taking advantage of the opportunity to preach the gospel, euangelizomai, and to proclaim, kerusso, to these people the good news about Jesus. That is what preaching is. It's proclamation to outsiders. But what's happening inside in the gatherings, there's different kinds of words that are being used. Teaching is one of them. It's building up one another, as we discussed, encouraging one another. It's more of a horizontal activity, and it's as Evans described it in the New Testament. What's happening in Christian assemblies is dialogic. It's dialogue. It's one-on-one. It's back and forth. It's not monologic, which preaching is in the New Testament. It is outside activity, one-way communication, one person blasting away to a mass audience in an effort to convert them. Evans made a great point there. He's not the only one who's noticed this either. This is so basically what you have going on in a first century gathering is multiple people speaking. You have a powerful role of elders, shepherds, who are known to be able to teach and admonish and to rebuke and to also refute ideas that are incorrect. So, but our mindset is so focused on preaching and pulpits and homiletics and delivering these grand orations. Okay, well, that's fine. You know, I've been through all those courses, been there, done that, and I've
right.
done many years in the pulpit, so I know that, but there's some problems with that as well.
One of my critiques, Tom, and maybe this will sound cynical, but this is just what I think about is so much of what we build in our modern churches is to maximize growth over discipleship. I believe discipleship requires courageous decisions that don't always contribute to growth. So, for example, worship is seen as an avenue of church growth. So if we can upgrade our equipment, if we can get a highly talented worship leader, if our excellence level is seamless and spot on, it's an attraction. People want to come to experience that. Same thing with preaching. You don't even really need to understand the Bible as long as you know how to move a room with your oratory, with a TED talk, right? It's this sort of feel good experience, like we've talked about, the talented people that contributes to drawing a crowd. Now, that's not to say people aren't blessed by that or get saved through that or not discipled in some way through that. But my critique is that we are focused more on the growth of our congregations than we are the depth of our congregations. Do you feel like there's any credence to that?
Huge. I'm with you. Preach on, David. I think you got it. The kind of growth that the New Testament is concerned about is spiritual growth of the individual. Virtually
Yeah.
every word you read in your New Testament, especially in the epistles, is targeted toward personal growth and development. And I fear that, man, with this whole worship emphasis where we're there for God, the focus on ourselves, which is where the focus should be, is lost. And so that personal growth gets gone. There's this, I've sometimes had people refute what I'm saying as because they say, going to church is all about God, because if it's all about us, it ain't about much. That sounds so wonderful and so holy and righteous, but it's baloney, because what God wants is for us to be getting better. In our gatherings, we should be working on one another. All those one anotherings, all the emphasis on edification and encouraging. Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. Let's get that verse out here for a second. The verse that's often used to shame people for not going to church. What it really says is, let us stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, but encouraging one another. Our gatherings should be all about encouraging one another and stirring up one
Yeah.
another to love and good works. That's the focus, but I think it largely gets lost in this glorious, holy effort to praise and worship God in our gatherings. But God's doing just fine, and I don't see
He
God
doesn't
as
need our worship.
I no Paul. There's a verse that often gets lost. It's so important, and Acts chapter 17, verse 24 and 25. Paul is at Athens, and he is preaching to outsiders, to the Athenians, to the pagans, and he says to them, the God who made the world and everything in it does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything.
Yep.
Now, Paul had to tell pagans this lesson, but now I think he has to come back and tell church people the same lesson, because everything our
Wow.
worship model gears toward is that we are there for God. That's why we're there. God is what's important. It's all about God. It's not about me. Now, God is saying, stop it, dudes. It is all about you. I want you to be able to get better. You're the same scoundrel you were 20 years ago, so get to work on yourself.
It's discipleship.
Discipleship. I'm with
Yeah. It reminds me of that song, Tom, The Heart of Worship, coming back to the heart of worship where it's all about you. I mean, that just ran through a generation. I mean, we're still singing that song, and in some ways it's true, but I think also in some ways it contributed to this individualistic get my church on, have my moment with God culture, you know?
Yeah.
And I have I've said this before, because even the language we use in church sometimes we'll say things like, let's just close our eyes, tune out all distractions, we bring the lights down so that we're not distracted by the people around us. And what I've said is, I actually think we need a little bit of distraction. We need to be distracted by the imperfect voices. We need to see one another because, and you'll probably know what the reference to this verse is, but the Bible says that we need to speak to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. It's not just a vertical ignore all distractions, turn up the music and sing to God. It's we need to look each other in the eye and sing to one another. There's something that's formational about that, you know?
Yep. That's Colossians 3:16, Ephesians 5:19.
There you go.
The idea
Yep.
is also there in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 15 to 19, in there as well. Here's the thing that may interest you as a worship leader. Um, in video number 5 of my series, I talk at length about music. And if you go to, do you use CCLI?
Absolutely.
Yes, of course you do.
Everybody does.
Everybody does. And for years, I was putting together all the songs for a particular church and putting them in PowerPoint. So I'd be in there every week. If you look at the top 10 songs on CCLI this week, now, I haven't been there, but I'll bet you anything that all 10 songs, or a minimum of 9 of those 10 songs, are worship songs, are praise songs delivered to God. They're vertical songs. But one thing I noticed back in the 70s when I was going to church, go back to the 60s where the Jesus movement is going on, and there's an emphasis on one anothering taking place. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. Do you know that song at all?
Yep. Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Well, yeah. So there was this horizontal music that was going on back then. You want horizontal music today? Forget about it. It's all praise and worship stuff. It's all vertical stuff. And you can see this at CCLI on an ongoing basis. Another way to look at this is now back in my library here, I've got several old hymnals. Okay. You remember what a hymnal is? Yes, of course you do. But it used to be
Yep.
when I would preach a sermon, there I used all that bad language. back in the 70s, I wanted to have a song at the end that went along with the sermon, right? And I'd open up the back. Well, what's your sermon about? Well, it's about loving one another. So we can go to look in the loving one another. There was all these indexed categories in the back that would deal with horizontal topics of serving one another, helping one another, loving one another, praying for one another. But now, all those horizontal topics, gone. We've only got the vertical stuff, vertical music, vertical music, vertical music. And uh,
Why?
well, because of the emphasis on worship. The worship model has
Mm,
gotten on steroids in the 90s, with the worship wars things, and it's out of control, out of control. Now, is there something sinful about singing praises to God? Well, of course not. But folks, we're missing out on this whole emphasis of the horizontal and building up one another and developing relationships and learning from one another and speaking to one another in songs, hymns,
yes.
and spiritual songs. You want to be biblical about this or
Yes.
not?
Yeah. So Tom, I read this somewhere, but I guess there's over 400 references to singing in the Bible. What do you make of that? So there's obviously singing to the Lord is important. You look at the Psalms. I don't want to leave this conversation with people thinking, let's do away with worship. Let's do away with singing. This has no place in the life of a believer. Let's just hang out together and talk. Where do you see the value of singing in the life of the church, in the life of believers?
Mm, great question. Um, the sense I get, I've studied through the New Testament asking that very question. And yeah, singing might be mentioned 400 times, but you want to look at the number of times it's in the Old Testament compared with the New. Uh, I did a comparison between the word sing and the word pray in the New Testament. And sing in the New Testament, I think, is found 9 times, but pray is found 150 times. And yet
Mm-hmm.
you go to our gatherings and we see this gross uh, inequity there. So what should we be doing? I think in the first century, the singing aspect was it was there for sure. As we referred to Colossians 3. Remember with Paul and Silas in prison in Acts chapter 16, and they're singing a hymn, just the two of them. They're not up on a stage with a spotlight and they're squinting their eyes and holding their hand in the air. They're just singing a song to one another, encouraging each other in this trying time of being in a dusky, uh, cold jail cell, but praying to God through that song. So singing still has an aspect, it's encouraging, but I think it probably took about 3 minutes to do a song. It still does to this day. And I think that's probably about the right amount for an hour long of something. But or you have some more, Give somebody else lead a song that they wrote that means something to them, and they're wanting to encourage and speak to one another with that song that they produced. Or
The
uh,
charismatics are hating what you're saying right now.
whoops,
They want to flow in the spirit. If worship isn't 45 minutes, God didn't show up.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But that wasn't true 40 years ago. Even in
Yeah.
an AG church or a Pentecostal situation, charismatic, but it's gone crazy now. So I think also in terms of this to jump out of the song thinking. If a song takes 3 minutes per person, I think messages delivered by people probably shouldn't take more than 3 minutes. And then other people weigh what is said, to use Paul's language in 1 Corinthians 14, I think it's verse 29. Let people speak and let others weigh what is said. Let people bring a song. Let someone bring a song and then let others weigh what is said. Because again, the point of
Mm.
this is to build up one another, is edification. As Paul said, let all things be done for edification. And one of the things he explicitly mentions in that verse is somebody might have a psalm. Let all things be done to build up one another. even psalms. Yes, they might be delivered to God, but the point here is to encourage one another with that message. Um, if we think our goal is to get God good in worship today so that he's so tickled with himself, wow, I really needed some good praise this week. I've been feeling down on myself. So you guys really, really picked me up today, says God. I know I don't see God saying that. I think he's more concerned about us developing ourselves into better human beings, better representatives of him and of Jesus in our weekly life.
Mm. This whole concept of bringing something to the gathering and different people sharing and weighing what is said and different viewpoints. It is all so that just feels like an alien planet of an experience, right? We
Mhm.
I would venture to say that the church today is not even a safe place to ask questions. In many places, it's if you begin to ask questions or have a different viewpoint, it's you're sort of pushed to the side, right? And everything is controlled by, the pastor. I don't know. It just seems like such a foreign concept with what we've built, but I do see the value of it. But I don't see how that's ever going to take root in church today. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, no, you're right, and it is actually true that if you get a group of 50 people or 100 or 500 people, if you're going to let everybody talk, it's pandemonium, and you'll never get
It
out of there.
necessitates small.
Yeah, but go ahead and have your big meeting, and do all your finely produced, well rehearsed songs by the worship band and the highfalutin preacher dude. Go ahead and do that, but it's got to get drilled down into the small groups of smaller venues where people can talk to one another and start to actually absorb this stuff. Because I fear
Yeah.
that with this worship mindset that we have, people are coming into these big worship services with the big show up front, and then they go back to their car, get in their car, and if you asked them what was the sermon about today, I don't know, but that bass guitar that today was really loud. I don't know. I don't think I like that. What are they really remembering? Where are they really growing through
Yeah.
the experience, or are they just watching the show? I don't know if people grow by watching the show. You've got to start belching it back somehow to be able to engage with the topic and start to develop your own thinking
Yes.
and your own practice based on that. And if you don't have that opportunity, it's not going to happen.
I see a challenge in this, Tom, in two different ways. So there's a challenge to those in ministry, pastors, leaders, to think about church and think about our gatherings in a way where we can ratchet it down and we give people a chance to be a part of the experience more, smaller groups, absolutely. But there's also the congregant, right? The church attender. If we can start thinking in less consumeristic terms, and I know our culture sort of leads people into consumerism. I get that. So that's like a leadership issue. But if anybody listening to this right now who's just, they love Jesus and they're a believer and they're a part of a church, to think, okay, the Sunday gathering is important, singing and worshiping, listening to the sermon, yes, but that can't be the extent of my discipleship. I need to get around other believers where I can talk about this, where I can flesh some of this out, where we can pray together, where we can take communion together. Does that seem like a reasonable challenge for our listeners today?
Very good. That works. I think that's the main point here. I think though eventually, if you start there and do that for sure. I think eventually somebody's going to say, "Well, why do we do what we do anyway in church? Shouldn't we be revising this in some way?" Well, I'm pleased
Yeah.
just toss out these clear biblical principles and then let it
Yep.
take root uh, in good time in every given little culture and little town and big city across the world, and let people start to see the wisdom and the productivity of building disciples and of people being edified by one another, not just one guy. who has all that
Yeah.
job.
Tom, I'm just totally just thinking out loud here as we're talking, but I think a lot of the worship movement it stems from a lot of the charismatic movement, right? So it's this belief that worship transports us into the presence of God, and when we are in the presence of God, anything is possible. So there's this idea that worship is sort of the gateway to miracles, to life change, to getting in the presence of God and never being the same again. Is there any credence to that, or does that? And I don't even know. You probably don't have as much of a charismatic background, but is there any truth to that, or does that get us into some scary territory?
Biblically, there's a little bit of evidence to support that idea. However, the real problem with it is it denies the biblical fact that God now dwells within all of us. We don't need to be getting together to try to conjure up God so that God will show
That's
up.
good.
You know, God should have already showed up in your life as a Christian the day you became a Christian, the day
Yeah.
you gave your life to Christ, when you were born again, when you had the Spirit of God placed inside you, so that God is now with you all the time. This is not fairy tale stuff. This is real biblical truth.
Mm.
And yet
Preach.
the idea that we got to get together to somehow conjure him up, do the right songs with the right B flat, sharp major, then God will be conjured and he will come down among us. Emmanuel means God with us. Jesus predicted the absolute destruction of the temple, the house of God. Now the new house of God is us. He's there all the
Mhm.
time. He doesn't get there as soon as we get together in church and start shaking things up and getting the right music going so that he shows. Oh, you got me started there, David. Now I'm off on a tangent.
Well, it
But
sounds in some ways it feels a little bit like the prophets of Baal, in the New Testament, where they're chanting and sort of trying to conjure up an experience.
in my
Um,
there's a in my video number 5, I talk about. If you think we haven't offended anybody yet, this might do it. So this will be the good one. I talk about the trance, trance, and this is something that seems to have emerged strongly since the 90s, where we haven't truly worshipped God until we have entered into the trance, where we have our eyes closed and maybe squinting just a bit, and our hands get raised. We have now entered into the trance, where we are one with God now, and we have experienced worship, true worship. And this is what we came for. We're looking for this worship experience, this trance. Okay, well, I'll just be happy just to take a pot shot at the trance idea. You want to think about God, think about God. I'll think about God, I think about him all the time. But to have this idea that we got to get worked up into this trance in order to have really, truly worshiped God this week, I don't know, our focus is just off. And this is not a first century Christianity. This is something else.
yeah. Whew. Some heavy stuff here.
You think, how many people do you think we've offended today?
um Probably quite a few, but I feel like my listeners have built some trust with me over the years to be able to wade into some difficult topics, right? Um, because I feel like there's two ways to come at this. There's the one side which is like kind of attacking systems, attacking the church, almost from kind of an atheistic viewpoint. Like, let's bring down the system. And then there's the other side of being within. the system, being a part of the church and saying, let's get back to a more biblical idea of what church is supposed to be, how we're supposed to be as the people of God. And so you can't confuse those two, right? It's you can be a part of the church and want to reform it so that we can look more like Jesus intended us to look. And so for that, I'm up for that challenge, you know?
Thank you for that.
So,
And that's what I'm after as well. But I will admit to you, David, that my videos have attracted a large percentage of folks who are in the home church movement.
mhm.
And there's a certain percentage of the folks in the home church movement that are ready to burn down the buildings. Yeah.
Yeah.
And deconstruct everything that we've,
Yep.
and I get it, I understand it, but this is not helpful. I don't think it's helpful to be just thinking that I'm the only person going to heaven and everybody else is going to hell because they go to church in the wrong way, or because they've got a worship pastor like David up there, they also think badly about pastors and preaching
Yeah.
and pulpits, and I get that, I understand that, I identify with that, but it, it's counterproductive, I think, to start to shift into a condemning mode, a judgmental mode, a Pharisaic mode
Yeah.
that thinks I've got it all right and they've got it all wrong, because there's so many things that I have not had the time to study through, and I'm sure I will die ignorantly believing something that is wrong because I
Yeah.
simply don't have the time. It took me 50 years to get to this bit about worship. And I'm pretty darn sure that what I'm saying is rock solid biblical truth. But how many other
Right.
things am I missing out on? So there's no reason for gloating or to look down on anybody else, because we're all screwed up in one way or another. We just need more patience and more time and more humility.
Yeah. I interviewed Lester Ruth. He's a worship historian at Duke Divinity a number of months back. And he said something that was insightful, where he said the church throughout history has picked up culture along the way. We're products of our cultural environment, and there's pluses and negatives to that. Talk about the late patristic period and the robes and the candles, and that was a cultural thing the church adopted. Or today with the American megachurch, like we adopt sort of rock concert ritual, right? The good side is that it's familiar to people. They feel like they can easily enter in, but the downside to that is celebrity culture. It's a byproduct of it. So if we can be wide awake, eyes wide open to what's going on, I think we're going to be okay. And having frank conversations like this, I think, is helpful rather than just burying our heads in the sand and pretending everything is just a okay all the time.
Well,
So,
I gotta commend you,
uh,
David. This is I have had just a couple of podcasts with worship leaders and people who are in the worship pastor business. Um,
mhm,
I have close friends who are worship pastors, and my son-in-law was a trained worship pastor, and so I get all that. But your openness and being willing to go ahead and explore some of these ideas, which are diametrically opposed to the common theology and philosophy that goes along with the worship pastor business. I commend you for your gutsy approach to this, and just to listen, ask questions, and let people see where they might lay on this whole issue. I just ask people, please don't hunt me down and shoot me. That's all I ask.
hopefully that will not happen as a result of this podcast.
I hope not.
Yeah, you know what, Tom? I don't know. Maybe some of my courage in these conversations is maybe the fact that I'm not a local church worship pastor right now. That might be harder for me if I was in it. I mean, I did it for 13 years full time. And I still believe in it. I still coach worship leaders in a lot of ways. I think there's some ways we can, and that's why I'm having this conversation is make it a little more biblical and healthy. But that might be some of the reason why I'm willing to have these conversations, right? Because my job's not at stake necessarily, in having these conversations. But I get a lot of messages, in direct messages from people who are worship pastors who just say, "Thank you for the conversations you're having. These are things I've wrestled with. These are things that I've talked about. And it's helping me navigate my current church situation, and that keeps me going. I'm sure you've heard similar things too with what you do.
Yeah,
So,
what you just said resonated on a couple different levels there in that, I've been outside of a denomination for 40 years. I've been outside of
mm,
paid ministry for 40 years. Uh, and
well,
it's that freedom that comes with that, where I can now consider other thoughts, other ideas, and start to explore the scriptures,
yes,
hopefully with an open mind and a clean slate, and look at it afresh, without having a paycheck attached to my conclusions.
amazing. So good. Tom Wadsworth, appreciate you, my friend. Thanks for your time today. And let's do a round two sometime. I'm sure there's more we could talk about, but this, I think, is good for a first conversation. Appreciate you. Thank you.